There you go. We are on a countdown. And yes, look who I have with me, everybody. My darling boy. You've got to sit up. You can't, you're laying all over me. Just like, okay. So good morning, everybody. And welcome to Story Time. So first of all, before we begin, I'd like to say good morning to Grey Eagle, who is actually standing between us to my right side. I'd like to say good morning to Chris. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Rosemary. Hi, Reese. Hi, everyone.
And let's say good morning to, who are you? Say hi to everybody. Say hi. And this is Reese. Good morning, Reese.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Okay. All right then. So Reese he loves story time. He wanted to come on story time, but he may not stay for the whole length of the story because, as he said to me, if it gets a bit boring, he's off, he's leaving. You can't lay on me, hun. There. Do you want to sit on a pillow or something? No? You okay there? All right. So, Chris, do we have anybody there? I mean,
yes, we do already. There? I think everybody's been waiting for you to log on, and they're here.
Okay, so are there any comments, questions, anything going on before I start my story?
No, just everyone saying good morning.
Oh, okay then. So, all right. So, people always say, I want to speak to my mother or my father. If there's any chance of anybody talking to someone in the spirit world, people say, I'd love to have a chance to do that. I'd love to hear from my father, my mother, my brother, so on and so forth. But what they don't do is, which Chris and I were talking about a little while ago, what they don't do is they don't necessarily do anything to make it happen. I love talking to my daddy, who's in the spirit world, silly grandpa, and I make a point from time to time to look for him. Sometimes I don't have to because sometimes he's just there for me. And I'm one of the fortunate ones because I can always see whoever's around. But for most of us, we don't necessarily see, and we don't necessarily hear those in the spirit world. We don't necessarily, sort of we don't necessarily do it naturally and easily. So what do people do if they don't do it naturally? If they can't do it naturally, what do people do? What can people do to hear, to sense, to see, to be around those in the spirit world and to connect with them? So to ensure that we understand that lost to us. Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to learn. Are you ready? I'm giving you some tips. We learn to raise our level of consciousness. I can hear you all saying, well, how do we do that then? Well, there are ways and means, and we may or may not talk about those ways or means later, but certainly we'll be doing a webinar at some point, and I'll be teaching you how to raise your level of consciousness and to raise your level of awareness so that you will be able to connect with your loved ones easily. But if you can't do that, or if you're not able to do that, a lot of people say, I'd like to see somebody in my dreams. But if you're not open to it, or if you don't know quite how to do it, or you don't know how to prepare for it, then what are you going to do? How are you going to do that? So again, we're going to be having a webinar to teach people again about how they can raise their level of consciousness and how they can become much, much more aware. Am I weird? Do you think I'm weird? What are you looking at there? So, all right. So, and then, of course, there is always the obvious way to go. And to me, the obvious way is if you want to talk to your family in the spirit world. And this, I think this applies whether you believe or not. If you have a doubt, or if you want to have an opportunity and you want to see if it works, then what should they do? Do you think, Reese? What do you think they should do, people, if they want to talk to someone who has died? Do you think they should find somebody like me? That would seem to be a sensible thing, right? So, more complaining, more wishing, more hoping won't get you anywhere unless you take certain steps forward. It's like I could really eat an apple pie right now, really want an apple pie, and then waiting for something to materialize in front of you, it's not going to happen. You either go get the apples and make the pastry and make yourself an apple pie, right? Or what do? You go to the baker's or the supermarket and you buy an apple pie. So it's the same thing. So if you want to talk to your loved ones in the spirit world, you learn how to do it yourself, which is not simple, but much easier than you might think. Or you go buy that apple pie, you find someone who can do that for you. And that means coming to somebody like myself. We're going to be talking about that later on, either today or maybe in another show. Now, before we continue, all we can see is the top of your head. And you're laying all over me, and I'm getting a bit hot and bothered. So I want you to go and get a big pillow, which is right next to you there. We're going to have him sit up. If you want to stay here for the story, right there. How much better is that? Ooh. Okay. Are you ready then? Oh, okay. So, oh gosh, you're still laying all over me. All right. So, somebody asked on the Wednesday show, somebody asked, do people in the spirit world ever argue? Do they ever fight? All right, I'm done with you now. You're either going to sit up or you have to go. Do you want to go? And I'll let you watch the story later. Would that be better? You want to stay? Then can you stop wriggling? Would you sit? Do any of you have this problem with your children and your grandchildren? Because my child is a wriggler. Right?
Reese,
Yes.
just play the freeze game. Just stay in one spot like you're frozen.
Oh, not with that face. All right. So, okay, then it is story time. This is a little bit of a complicated story. So, okay, we should go take it a step at a time. And if, Chris, you don't understand what I'm saying afterwards, or if you think I could explain better, I'm relying on you to keep a check on the story and to let me know if it might need a little bit more explanation. So as I said, somebody asked the question, do people in the spirit world argue? Do they fight? Do they? And I had to think for a minute until I remembered this story. So, once upon a time. So once upon a time, many years ago, my friend and colleague, Mick Maguire, who was a healer, very fine healer, very wonderful healer, he had a patient who came to him, a young man who I'm going to say he was probably sort of in his late teens or early 20s. For the sake of this story, we're going to call him John. Okay, so we're going to now talk about John, the young man. Now, so Mick brought John to see me. And Mick called me beforehand and told me John's story, told me a little bit anyway of John's story. And John was a very troubled teenager. In fact, he'd been troubled for most of his life. And his grandmother and his mother who raised him had died. And since that time, since they had died, he had tried many, many times to take his own life. Both of his arms had cuts everywhere. He sliced and diced himself. Don't worry, I promise it's not a gruesome story. And he just felt, he was so confused, this poor young man was so confused, he thought that the only way that he could, sort of move forward was if he could somehow get somebody's attention. Because let's face it, if you want to take your own life, you might fail the first time, but you won't fail the second time. If that's really your intention, you won't fail. This young man had tried many, many times. So really, basically, what he was doing on a subconscious level, he was crying out for help. And so eventually he was brought to Mick. And Mick, knowing that he's a healer, but maybe there was a little bit of something else, a little bit more that needed to be, a little bit more insight, called me and said, I don't quite know what to do with John. I'm at a bit of a loss with him. I don't seem to be getting through to him. Would you mind if I brought him to come to see you? So sure enough, John came to see me. And he sat in front of me. I have to tell you, he was very nervous. He was very quiet. He was extremely shy. He had very little in the way of personality. He was obviously extremely depressed. So I asked Grey Eagle, what should we do? How could we help John? Right? Because that's what Mosey does, don't I? So how can we possibly help John? What can we do? And Grey Eagle said, well, I think let's see if we can talk to his mother and his grandmother, because they're here waiting to talk to John, and they're here waiting to talk to you, Rosemary. And they'll explain exactly why John is the way he is, and they'll explain how John has become so confused. So sure enough, these two women came forward. I saw them very clearly. And I asked John, would it be okay if we did this? And he'd said yes, that he would like to talk to his mum and he would like to talk to his grandmother. So we sat there and I described the grandmother and I described the mother and I talked to John about them, what I was seeing. And sure enough, John recognized them. But then I have this weird thing that I do, right? It's a very weird thing because I'm able to go into the past. I'm able to literally I can go into anybody's house. I can go into any of your houses. I can go to the scene of an accident that happened even 10 years ago. I can go and I can be there as if it's happening right in the moment. So this sort of thing, I refer to it as going down and back and through the hole, because it almost seems as if I am going down, back, and through time and space to perhaps another time. And sure enough, that's what I was doing now. And I went back to the time when John was a little boy and his grandmother and his mother were very much alive. I went back to the time when John's father was also in the house. I'm not going to tell you the intricate details, but briefly I'll tell you the story. So what happened to John was that his father left, and he left them. You might say that he abandoned them. Before you judge John's father, you might want to think there might have been a reason why, but still. So John's mother took all the photos of John's father out of the house. There were no men allowed into the house ever again. And John's mother would disparage men continually, tell the little boy John how awful men were, how mean they were, how cruel they were. They were nothing. They were not of any value. John's mother was an extremely bitter, a very angry, very vitriolic, a very mean person. So as John was growing up, this beautiful little boy, as he was growing up, he would listen as his mother and also his grandmother from time to time would tell him how worthless men were. Okay? To the point where John was definitely brainwashed, to the point where John was definitely influenced. So as he grew older and became a man himself, he would look in the mirror and he would hear his mother's words. All men are worthless. All men are nothing. And he believed it. Now, his grandmother, at some point in John's growing up years, and she lived with them, she realised the damage that was being caused to John by his mother's mean and cruel behaviour. So his mother and his grandmother would argue all the time because his grandmother tried to stop his mother from doing these things. Anyway, you can imagine, right? Growing up in a house like that as a little boy and being told, what do we tell you, Reese? What do Mama and Rosie tell you? We always tell you how beautiful we are, don't we? And we always tell you how clever you are and how special you are. Can you imagine a little boy growing up who was told the opposite, that he was horrible, that he was nothing, and that when he would be a man, he would be nothing? Ooh, we wouldn't do that, would we? No. But poor John's mother, and to some degree his grandmother, confused John to the point where when they died, he was left a man looking in the mirror, seeing nothing but a worthless creature. And he did not know what to do with it, which is why he tried again and again to take his own life. Now remember, as I'm seeing all of this, and as I'm seeing what happened in this household, I have John's mother and grandmother standing next to me. The grandmother was weeping silently. She was crying. She knew that the damage that they had done. But the mother was still angry, and she was still mean. And she started being mean to her mother. And then they started playing the blame game. The grandmother pointing her finger to the mother and saying, you did this, and the mother saying, no, I didn't, and so on. And this argument between the two women, as I'm sitting there talking to them, as their son is sitting in front of them in such distress and so devastated that he's tried to kill himself so many times, and still they're arguing, and still they were fighting. And you might say, well, how could that be? They've died now, don't they know better? Well, apparently they didn't, did they? They didn't know any better. The grandmother was much better, much nicer than the mother, but they were still fighting, and they were still fighting over this boy. They were still fighting to somehow have control over John. And I was telling John and Mick, who was also there with us, I was telling them what I was hearing, what I was seeing. And at one point I looked at John and I said to John, I have to tell you that your mother and your grandmother are the worst, the most awful people that I've spoken to in a long, long time. His eyes grew really, really wide. And I said to John, I'm going to tell them that if they don't stop arguing, I won't talk to them anymore because I'm not going to have it. It was the very first time that John had heard anybody criticize his mother and his grandmother. It was the very first time that John was told by me, this is not your fault. This is two wicked harridans. This is two wicked women who have been, we're going to ignore that. This is two awful women. This is two wicked women who've made your life miserable because of their failings. So I had a long talk to John after we finished with the mother and the grandmother, who for all I know, even all these years later, are still arguing and fighting. But we don't worry about them because that's their choice. And I talked to John and I talked about how when a woman is left or sometimes left by her husband, or even a man who is left by his wife, you know, it can do awful things to them. And I defended John, and I was able to explain to John about his mother and his grandmother, and that they were the ones in the wrong. It wasn't that he was worthless, it was that they were worthless in this situation with him. We had a long talk that day, John and I, and then Mick became involved as well. And at the end of that session, John and Mick left the house. And from time to time, Mick would tell me, I've seen John, he seems to be doing okay, he seems much better. And so I sort of kept tabs on him a little bit. And about a year later, I went to do a big event in the town where I lived. And I pulled into the car park, and I was meeting Mick in the car park. And I got out of the car, and Mick got out of his car, and a young man got out of Mick's car. But this young man was bright and happy and had a great personality. And he shouted, Rosemary, and he ran across the car park, and he picked me up and he swung me around. Guess who it was? It was John. All of a sudden, he changed, knowing that his mother and his grandmother were at fault. There was nothing wrong with him at all. It was just them. Do people in the spirit world argue? They did. I can't speak for every person in the spirit world, but they certainly did, to the point where Gregor watched as I kicked them off and kicked them out and said to Gregor, I'm not putting up with this anymore. And we kicked them out. And when John saw that we were able to do that, that we weren't going to tolerate the nonsense, he decided he wasn't going to tolerate it either. And it made him realize there's nothing wrong with me. It's just these awful women that brought me up. What do you think of that story? Shall we say the end? The end. Chris, how did you like that story?
Well, it's amazing. I've seen over all these years the transformations that you have brought to people's lives from doing what you do, and gosh, that's just so joyful.
Yeah, it really was. It was amazing to see this poor young man who'd lived all of his life since he was a little boy. And we try to protect and love and care for our children, don't we? Do you try and care and protect for me too? Protect me as well, do you? Do you? Do you give me healing when I'm sick? You do, don't you? Yeah. See how are we having lots of cuddles on this story time? Do you want to now go and play on your iPad? Don't disappear. Say goodbye to everybody. Bye, everybody.
See you later, Reese.
So they, oh gosh, so hot. Can't believe he's like a little oven sitting next to him. It's like, wow. So that's my story, the end. And, you know, it's sort of, I think it brings it home to us a little bit that, you know, we think, a lot of us think that when we die, then that every problem that we have, every issue that we have, every you know, every painful experience is just going to disappear. It's just going to go away. And then what? We sit on a cloud, or we just, you know, we're in heaven, so everything is made right. And unfortunately, it isn't like that. Unfortunately, there are many people who, having passed, they have so many regrets. They have so many, you know, things that they are, if only, they have so many if onlys. If only I'd done this, if only I'd said that. I had a father who came to talk to his son, and his one overriding regret, having passed into the spirit world, was, and he said to his son, if only I had shown you more affection, then you would know how to be affectionate. If only I had told you I loved you more, you would be able to say that you loved your wife and you loved your children. If only I had shown you, you know, the right way to be, you would be happier. So there are many of us, I think, who, having passed into the spirit world, we then have the regrets and the if onlys. And so I think it's very important. And this story, I think, is very important. It shows us, you know, to live our life, understanding that our actions, what we say, what we do, affect other people tremendously, even though we don't always see it. that we should always strive to live our lives in the most loving and in the most caring way, and to not leave this earth with regrets, or if we do, I'm sure we all do a little bit, to leave this earth with as few regrets as possible. And because we never know when it is we're going to go, then that means every day, living every day with as few regrets as possible. So if you, listening, have an issue with somebody, if you've not spoken to somebody who you really love, doesn't matter whose fault it is, you say sorry to people. I'm sorry. You can say I'm sorry that we haven't spoken, or I'm sorry I haven't been in touch. Doesn't mean you're saying I'm sorry for doing the thing that was your fault in the first place. It's not about blaming. It's not about pointing fingers. It's about making things right. So if anyone listening knows that they've done something wrong, or said something wrong, or perhaps not said what they know they should say, don't leave this earth without fixing it. And you never know how long you're going to be. So get moving on it, would you? Go fix the issues that you have with the people that you love, because you just never know when the opportunity is just going to be taken away from you. Chris, do we have comments, questions, anything going on?
Yes, we do. So straight off from the beginning, before you started your story, Cheryl says, everyone in your family has such amazing eyes, because you've had Samantha on recently and Reese a few different times.
Thank you. Yes.
There's lots of good mornings from people in all the places, that you reach, really. Julia's sending lots of love. Loretta says, adorable child. We've got good mornings from California and England. Let's see. Carolyn says, I look forward to a webinar on raising our awareness.
Well, yes. Well, it's coming. Definitely coming. But be prepared to work. It'll be 3 solid hours of I'll be making you work, taking notes, doing exercises, all that sort of thing. But raising our level of awareness is very, very important to I think, to all of us. And there's so many people. Well, how do we begin? How do we start? So I can help you on the way to starting. We're also thinking at some point of doing a series of webinars, teaching webinars. So you might want to think about that. But if you are subscribed to our website or wherever it is, or to YouTube, if you subscribe, you will get notification once a month. You'll get a newsletter which will tell you what we're planning, what we're up to, what we're doing. And you will also have an opportunity to, maybe even write an article yourself, or make a little comment that we could put in the newsletter. I think that would be a good idea too, don't you, Chris?
Absolutely. We love our community here. And this past week on Facebook, we put out a survey to ask people what they would like to learn about. So if you're thinking about that now, just pop onto the Facebook page and just write in the comments what you would like webinars to be about, and we will look it over.
Okay. All right. While I think talking webinars, next week is our webinar talking to those in the spirit world. If you don't have your tickets yet, go straight to our website, rosemaryaltea.com, and click on, there'll be a link there. You can click on the link and get your tickets, because we are going to be spending several hours, at least 3 hours, next Saturday morning. I hate this phrase, talking to the dead, because you all know, don't you, that I don't believe in dead and dying. I don't believe that we do die, but talking to the dead is it's an explicit way of describing that's exactly what we're going to be doing. So for those of you who think, well, I don't necessarily believe in this, that's fine. But join, you may be surprised. For those of you who want a message, don't sit around twiddling your thumbs and saying, I wish I could talk to my mum, my dad. You've got to be open about these things. But you've also got to put yourself in a situation and in a place where it's possible that it will happen. And so, thinking about that, go check out the website and see what you have to do. in order to join us next Saturday morning. Chris?
Sharon was asking, by learning to raise our consciousness, will we be able to physically hear or see our loved ones?
Yes. Yes and no. And well, yes, because there are different ways, and the different ways we can see. There are different ways that we can connect. So you may not necessarily be able to see, as in, sort of with your vision, see, but you may be able to see them in another way. You may be able to be aware of them there, be aware of their presence. You may be able to, by using one of your 5 senses, and part of the of the process of raising your level of consciousness is raising the awareness of each of your 5 senses. And when people are always talking about, yes, but I want my 6th sense, I want to connect with my 6th sense. Well, in order to connect to your 6th sense, you have to connect to your 5 senses, because your 5 senses combined are what make your 6th sense. So it's the culmination of the 5 senses. And for those of you who maybe are deaf, or those of you who may be blind, or you don't have one of your 5 senses, trust me that you do have them, but just in a very different way. So connecting and enhancing and raising your awareness of your 5 senses brings you to the culmination of being able to connect in with that 6th sense, which is all those 5 senses combined. And then you become much more aware, much more knowing of what is going on around you, which is normally beyond your vision or beyond your hearing or whatever. And so raising your level of awareness helps to raise your level of consciousness, so that you are much more aware of things that perhaps were out of your line of vision before, or out of your line of hearing before. Things that are beyond you suddenly become more available to you. Chris?
Judith says, if I had been a man in that household, I would have left too.
Yes.
Poor little boy, but that's a
Yes.
happy ending, and thank you for helping him.
Yes. Well, actually, it really, although I did help, I mean, my heart went out to this boy, because when I saw him as a little one, when I was able to go back in time and space, and could see him and could see how cowed he was, and these 2 women fighting for control over this child. I mean, believe you me, when I tell the story, I haven't told you the full story. We don't have time for the full story, but let me say, was like a horror story. These 2 women playing tug of war with this little boy's emotions and his feelings, and every time it happened, which was every day, all day, every day, he was pulled into believing that men were despicable, ugly, horrible creatures, and he was growing into one. You can understand why he tried to take his own life. I don't necessarily believe that he tried. Well, if he'd have tried hard enough, he'd have succeeded. But if you'd have seen his arms, and I can say this because Reese isn't here to listen to this, but his arms were so scarred, so badly scarred for the amount of times that he tried, and ended up in hospital, ended up in a psychiatric ward. I mean, he had all sorts of issues. And really all it needed was for him to see somebody who he respected, somebody who he could see was a good person, standing up for him against them. And actually, what I didn't say was, I told them to shut up and to stop arguing. And he'd never heard anyone go up against these 2 women before either. So for him, it was a revelation, watching all this going on and seeing all of this. It was a revelation to him that that it really wasn't him, it was them. So it was an amazing thing. And then to see him a year later, bright, happy, personality just kept booming out. He was such a sweetheart, such a real sweetheart. So yes, I love that story. Yes, Chris?
Maggie says it's horrible what families can do, What about dealing with people who do this now? I know a family that is a mess. The grandmother has told her daughter she wished the daughter was never born and has wished death to a person I care about.
Well, I mean, we can't help everybody. All I can advise for all of you there, if you see injustice going on, please don't sit quiet and say nothing. You also don't necessarily need to shout out or to shout at someone or be mean to somebody. The quieter you say, that is not a nice thing to say. The quieter you are when you say these things, but with firmness, but also in some ways with gentleness, pointing out to somebody, I'm not going to sit here and let you do this and say nothing. I'm not going to let this go by. Years ago, and we all know this, even those of you who are too young to know anything about the war. I was born after the war. Don't think I was born before the war. I was born after the war, but my father was a soldier. And so, we knew all of these things that went on. And when you look back at the way that Hitler came to power, and it started with the whispers about the Jews, and then before you know it, every Jew had to wear a badge, an armband, saying that, declaring that they were Jewish, and of course they were ostracized for being Jewish. Now I'm going to say something now that is probably hugely controversial, but it's been gnawing at me, and I've just said to you, when you see injustice, say something. So I'm now going to say this. For all of you out there who have had your COVID shots, can you just please mind your own business if somebody you know does not have their COVID shot? It's called freedom. Aren't we a country which prizes freedom and which prizes choice? If people choose not to have the COVID shot, would you just back off and let them deal with themselves? Make sure that you take precautions. If you choose not to be around people who have not had their COVID shots, that's your choice. Nobody's arguing the rights and wrongs of it, but now all of a sudden in New York City, in order to go into a restaurant, you have to show a card which says you've had a COVID shot. Now all of a sudden in New York City, you can't go into a cinema, you can't go anywhere without sort of showing that this identification. And I can't help thinking, and I'm told you it's controversial, I can't help thinking, is this the thin end of the wedge? Will we all be having to wear armbands saying we did or we did not have a COVID shot? Because I know that a lot of people out there would like that. They would like to know, if they're walking down the street, did somebody have a COVID shot or not have a COVID shot? If you are a person who feels strongly that everyone should have a COVID shot, good for you. If you've had one, good for you. But isn't this a country of freedom, of free speech? Wasn't Hitler and his movement against the Jews, the people who were different, the people who didn't conform to his way of life, wasn't his view inching its way until all of a sudden, before you even know it, those poor people are having to wear armbands to say, look, I'm different. Worse, they're saying, these people are, the Jews are scum, they're dirty, they are filthy. There are people out there, there are people on the streets of New York, I can tell you, I can assure you, because I've come across it myself. I personally was verbally attacked to the point where the man was in my face. And if I'd had pepper spray in my pocket, he would have definitely got that. I understand strong feelings. I understand why people should feel strongly. But can you all please remember this? We are a country of freedom. We are a country of free speech. We're a country of being allowed our own viewpoint. And nobody has the right to push their views onto somebody else. So I just feel so strongly here. What is this world coming to? Because the politicians and the pharmacists and all those people who are out to make money or out to get control of people. A fear-mongering is beyond belief, beyond belief. The fear-mongering that is going on is diabolical. So I feel I've just said to all of you, if you see something going on and you hear something going on that you don't like, do it nicely, do it gently, and that's what I'm doing. But stand up and say your piece. I feel that this, for some, is the thin end of the wedge. When will we have to be card-carrying members of something else that the politicians or the people in charge or the people who rule this country, what else is next? What is next? First of all, you're a card-carrying, whatever it is, that COVID card thing. Next, you'll have to prove what? What's next? What is next? Isn't it scary for you? Because for me, COVID is not nearly as scary as what else is going on. So please, please, let's have a little tolerance. Let's have a little understanding. And let's back off judging other people for their choices and just make sure that we're the ones making the right choice. Chris.
All right. So Carolyn's saying, I love the story of John. You helped him to free himself, so he was then free to bloom and blossom.
Yes. Without a doubt. Have I silenced everybody else?
I'll see as I start to scroll down. I'd had other comments already rolled up.
Okay,
Lorette is saying it was great advice. Patricia's saying good evening from Perth, Australia.
Hi.
People are saying I look forward to a webinar to teach awareness raising.
Good.
Will raising our consciousness also open us up to other spirits? That's from Sharon.
Raising your level of consciousness simply makes you much more aware. And, you know, when we become more aware, when we become more open, there are things also that we need to do to make sure that we don't sort of fly off into, you know, sort of craziness. So there are ways to protect ourselves. There are ways to make sure that we don't go off or be influenced by negative forces. So we have to pay attention to all of that as well. So believe you me, I'm not going to teach you how to raise your level of awareness without teaching you how to make sure that you are safe doing it. You know, this is one of the reasons why I don't like giving messages to people that have maybe have in-depth and long-term consequences. This is why I advise people to come and see somebody like myself, to make an appointment and, you know, and to come and see someone, or to you know, even to go to a counselor or what have you, because the responsibility of what we do here, the responsibility of teaching you to raise your level of awareness, for instance, the responsibility of giving you a message which could change your life, the responsibility is huge. So I don't believe, and you can go to lots of different websites, trust me, you can go to lots of different places where and I'm going to use the term loosely, the medium or the psychic, whoever that is giving message after message after message, you know, verbal, out it pours out with no thought or consequences of what they're saying. And if they're doing that, you know, like this, you can guarantee that it's not real, or that, you know, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. You have to be aware of that. So I know that there are people who are disappointed because I don't sort their lives out for them on a show like this, but we have an hour and I'm not going to do it because I am going to be much, much more responsible than that. And I will always be mindful. If I'm teaching you something, I'm also going to teach you, you know, the positives of it, the negatives of it, and how you deal with them in the right way. So, you know, sort of, I guess I say to my students, hold my hand and I will guide you. Hold my hand and Greg Eagle will guide you. So that's where we should be when we're doing these webinars. Chris.
Bren's asking, if I see my father cheating on my mother. Should I say anything to either of them? They are in their 60s. Is it my place to say anything? They have been married over 30 years.
Oh dear. Well, first of all, if your mother is completely unaware and it's not hurting her, there might be a good reason to not say something. But if she is miserable and unhappy, and this may be her opportunity to get out of the marriage, who knows? So it's debatable as to whether you should say something to your mother if it's your father having the affair, this is, or vice versa. It's debatable as to whether you should say something to the injured party. But if it were me, and I can only say if it were me, and I can't say that you should do this, I can only say if it were me, I would quietly go to my parent, the naughty one, and say, I'm very aware of what you're doing, and either you stop doing this, or I feel that I'm going to have to tell mum. So that would be my choice. Or maybe you want to go another route. Maybe you want to say, I'm fully aware of what you're doing. I don't know how long it's been going on. For all you know, it could have been going on if they've been married for 30 years. It could have been going on for 31 years. I knew that happened. I know that happened to somebody very, very close to me. Her husband married her, still having a full-blown affair with somebody that he'd been having an affair with for 5 years, who was also married, until the husband of the other guy wrote a letter to the person I know very, very well, a week before Christmas, to tell her what was going on. How nice of him to do that. It devastated my sister. It devastated the whole family. Oh dear, I've just told you who it was now. Anyway, it devastated the person I knew. It devastated everybody. So do think very carefully before you. Do think very carefully before you actually approach something like this. But I would give your father the opportunity to maybe tell your mother himself, or give you a reason why you shouldn't. Chris, ooh.
Helen's saying, so glad you're brave enough to say that, Rosemary. Your talk about labeling people.
Right.
Marta's saying hello from Spain.
Hi.
All right, so now we're getting some more comments about your last statement about COVID. So
Okay.
Maggie saying, I totally agree with you on the vaccine. I've read where those having the vaccine is carrying the virus when going out spreading just as much as they are saying non-vaccinated are. Wendy's saying, thank you for saying that about the COVID shots. You are 100% correct. Come back to Florida. No cards needed here. Loretta's saying, I agree 100%. Amy's saying, very true. Maggie's saying, I'm waiting for those unvaccinated to have to wear a star on their clothing.
So what again?
I'm waiting for those unvaccinated to have to wear a star on their clothing. She's tying in the Jewish being forced to wear
I get
a star.
that. I hope she's not saying that that's what she wants.
No, I think it's facetiously she's saying it that way.
Well, let me tell you, if that ever happens, God help this country, because it won't be a free country anymore. There won't be anything like free speech, and we'll end up in with a dictatorship. So, and again, I'm saying, and I'm saying it out loud, everybody. I'm not saying I'm for COVID vaccination. I'm not saying I'm against COVID vaccination. I'm saying it's everybody's individual choice. That's what I'm saying. So, I'm saying that people who are aggressive, loud, mean, and even those who do it sort of, let's say, in a nice way, but judgmental and judging, back off. It's not your choice to make or not to make. It's everybody's individual choice. So the next thing might be, okay, everybody who, wants to have a certain treatment in hospital, they can only have it if. It's the thin end of the wedge that we're at here, people, just so you know. That's what I feel. And I feel very, very strongly that all of a sudden this country, and even in the world and in other free countries, it's the thin end of the wedge. What will it be next that we have to do, or that we're forced to do, or society forces us to do? And that is my biggest concern. So dictatorships don't all of a sudden appear. You don't all of a sudden one day get the dictator standing on the podium. It's an insidious thing. It happens slowly. It creeps up on us. And before we know it, we were partly responsible because we were the ones judging as well. So that's what I'm saying. Please, please be aware. Thin end of the wedge. Chris.
Well, you and I have talked about this behind the scenes, where I would say it's the metaphor, if people have heard it, about boiling the frog. You put a frog in a nice cool pot of water, and then you slowly turn up the heat, and it gets acclimated. You slowly turn up the heat, it gets acclimated, and this is what happens.
And that's what is happening. People are becoming acclimatized to the idea of the COVID vaccine, and everybody should have it. A lot of people are affected because they have been made fearful by all of the nonsense that is out there about COVID. Because let's face it, I'm not saying there isn't COVID. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying here. Don't take what I'm saying and turn it around and make it, something that you can argue with me against. I'm fully aware that COVID exists. I'm fully aware that it kills people. I'm fully aware that cancer exists and kills people. I'm fully aware that influenza exists and kills people. I'm fully aware that there are diseases out there, and we should absolutely, all of us, take all necessary precautions. But if you don't, if a smoker is told, my father was told, smoke and you'll die. Well, he smoked and he died. I mean, you take precautions or you don't. You take certain steps or you don't. Nobody else should be dictating what you as an adult want to do or should do. And certainly, this pressure, this social pressure that is upon us right now. I mean, the fact that you can't go to a restaurant, you've got to show a card in New York City. You've got to show a card now before they'll let you in. Well, personally, I wouldn't go to that restaurant, whether I had a card or whether I didn't have a card. I would never go to that restaurant because who are they? And I am not going to buy into the possibility down the road of having to wear a star to prove that this is who I am. No way am I going to do it. I'd rather never go. I would rather never step foot in another restaurant. And I urge anybody to do the same thing, because what you're doing, if you go into a restaurant, you're showing your card, you're buying into this beginnings of dictatorship, the beginning of the end of freedom. Chris.
All right. Sandra says, I would like Rosemary to consider publishing a story time book. She has so many great ones. But isn't that what many of your books are, really?
Well, yes. All of the books, all my, except I think for possibly, well, there are two. The Angels in Training, although that is full of stories of how people can become angels in training, helping out angels to do their work. So it is sort of full of stories, but Soul Science perhaps doesn't have so many stories. But in every other book that I've ever written, I like to put in a section of case books, which is the case book stories. But I do like the idea of just having story upon story upon story upon story in a book and nothing else. I quite like that idea. Or maybe, here's a better idea, maybe I could do some sort of a CD or a DVD and just tell a whole load of stories for people to listen to, and you can also watch as well. How about that for an idea? We like it. The idea is growing on us. Chris?
Well, the other idea that pops into my mind right now is I mean, look how many consultations you've given, right? And while you're in the midst of this conversation, you're sharing information, which doesn't mean you're retaining everything that you would like to retain to write another book.
Right.
So maybe if people who have had consultations with you would care to share their story and send it into the office, you could consider which ones you would want to add to another book.
We could compile a new book.
Exactly.
Consultations not seen through my eyes, but seen through the eyes of the person who's had the consultation. We'd love to do that. I think that's a great idea. So if you'd like to sort of, be a part of that, please email us, Chris, Kris, at rosemaryaltea.com. Or if you choose to if you don't remember Chris, you're not at all forgettable, Chris. You're unforgettable. But if you can't remember Chris at rosemaryaltea.com, just write to Rosemary at rosemaryaltea.com and, sort of join in and tell us your story about your consultation with me. And I don't mind. You could put in anything you like. We'll take the negative and the positive, anything you want. Chris.
So we're coming right up to time, but I think it's really important for this one comment that you clarify, Rosemary. So Skip says, it's very sad that you are using your public influence to discourage vaccination.
I'm not.
Which is the effect of your divergence from your usual stances.
No.
Let me, I just got to scroll just a little bit. Whatever your actual intention. So I think you should spend a couple minutes on that one.
So Skip, I'm really glad for this comment because now gives me the opportunity to correct. And if anyone out there has been listening to me and thinks that I'm saying don't get vaccinated, that is absolutely not what I am saying. Absolutely not. If you choose to be vaccinated, that's brilliant for you. It's a precaution that you feel that you need to take, and I'm for it for you. Absolutely, I'm for it. For anybody who has decided to take the vaccination, have the vaccination, I'm absolutely 1,000% for it. And I would encourage you to not second guess yourself. Okay. For those of you who choose not to be vaccinated, what I'm saying is I'm not for it and I'm not against it because I don't have an opinion for you. I have an opinion for myself. I have an opinion for, people who do or people who don't, but it's my opinion and it should have nothing to do with your choice. So Skip, I'm really, really pleased that you brought this up because I'm going to clarify once more. Please, anybody out there who thinks that I don't believe in COVID, I do. Anybody out there who thinks that I think that COVID is going to be over and done with, I actually don't. I think that COVID is something that we're going to be, how we're going to live with. Fortunately, we have great scientists. We have great people, fabulous people who are working on, in the same way that influenza was, when influenza was new with us all, and now we don't think about it too much. There are still lots of people who die of influenza, by the way, but we take our precautions and we take our medicines, and that's good. For those of you who've had the COVID vaccination, I think it's great. I don't argue it at all. Would I encourage you to have the vaccination? I encourage you to make up your own mind and make your own choices, because I'm not a person who can make those choices for you. But certainly, I'm not condemning people who don't have the vaccination. I'm trying to be understanding of them and to say to them, you are free. This is a free country. You have your free opinion. What I'm saying is, when I walk down the street, nobody knows if I've been vaccinated or not. Nobody. But imagine if I had to have a stamp on my forehead like they used to do with women centuries ago, you know, the Scarlet Woman. Imagine if I had to wear a label saying, you know, that I had or had not been vaccinated, whatever it is. Here's what I'm saying. I'm saying we are all free to choose, and isn't that what a free country is about? And isn't that what you know, we talk about when we, you know, the home of the free? I mean, America is such an amazing, a fantastic country, but we all know that that is because it is the land of the free, the home of the free, the home of the brave, the home of the free. And if we allow people to force, in a societal way, to force people to do one thing or another, if we allow people, or if we are part of those people who are coercing other people into doing something they don't want to do, then all of a sudden it's the thin end of the wedge. That's what I'm saying. But please, Skip, my darling, if I gave the impression that I'm against the COVID vaccination, I am not at all. I am absolutely for whatever it is that makes us safe, not just as individuals, but makes us safe as a whole, makes us safe as a country. But I'm also equally passionate about allowing people to make their own choices, because where would we be if we were not free? Where would we be if we were prisoners of society, prisoners of other people's ideas? And it is the thin end of the wedge if we allow that to happen. So, Skip, I do hope have I made it clear now, Chris?
I do believe you have.
I'm not against, in any way, shape or form, I'm not against the vaccine. I feel that if you feel that it's right for you, absolutely you should do it without one iota of doubt. If that is what you need to do, then that is what you need to do. But I'm also equally going to say, for anybody who decides not to do it, it is not for me to judge. I don't know you, and you know, I don't want to judge anybody. It's the same way with religion. Do you believe in what I believe in? No. Am I going to therefore ostracize you? Absolutely not. Freedom is what I'm trying to say here. And maybe, Skip, maybe COVID was a bad example, but it is the example. I'm in New York City right now, and it is the example that is sort of hitting me right in the eye as we go about New York City. And the idea that restaurants won't take you unless you have a card saying that you are vaccinated. To me, I would never enter that restaurant ever. And I would advise other people not to. Not because you've had or you didn't have the COVID vaccination, but because I'm not going to allow other people to dictate to me my freedom and my free choice. As it happens, you know, I'm sure that we all would be able to go into that restaurant and no problem whatsoever. I don't like the dictator part of it, is what I'm saying. So, Jesus, have I clarified that? I don't want anyone thinking here that I am against the COVID vaccination, because I'm not. I don't want anyone here thinking that I'm against taking the best precautions we can. But one person's idea of precautions and another person's idea of precautions are different. And if I don't agree with them, if I don't agree with your way, and I think it endangers me, then it's my responsibility to stay away from you, and that's what I'm going to do. It's not my responsibility to coerce anyone into, you know, sort of having to give up their freedom of choice.
All right, so we've gone over time here today, Rosemary. Next week, next Saturday, we will not be here for story time because we will be doing your messages from the spirit world webinar.
Yes. So, all right. Thank you, everybody. I knew it would be controversial, but the one thing I don't want is to be misunderstood in what I'm saying. Anyway, so thank you all for joining us today, and I hope I'll see you all next time around. And you know, if not, it's freedom of choice, right? All right. So I'd like to say thank you to Chris. I'd like to say thank you to Grey Eagle. I'd like to once again say thank you to all of you out there for joining us. And please, you know, we should be back on Thursday morning. We should be doing a lot of off the cuff stuff. So please, you know, thank you all, and please have a very blessed rest of the day, everybody, and a very blessed rest of the weekend. Bye-bye.